One of my big personal pet peeves is that I feel like the people in office do not listen to us.
I want to have my voice out there. I want to tell them what I want.
If you want to have a say so, get involved.
Without the individual's participation, we have no democracy.
When everyone talks about the government, we are the government.
By the people. Citizens' Voices. This program was made possible by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, with additional support from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ray Suarez, and welcome to By the People, an ongoing effort to give voice to the concerns of average Americans. In our previous shows, we've looked at how the U.S. relates to the rest of the world through its foreign policy, the war on terror, trade issues, and the outsourcing of jobs. Today, we examine two critical domestic issues, healthcare and education, and their impact on the prestige and global competitiveness of America. Joining us in this effort are 16 public television stations and their local partners, who over the past 2 weeks convened small gatherings of ordinary Americans. Some of the stations chose to focus on healthcare, others on education. While the conversations covered a wide variety of topics, they were united by the spirit of civic engagement. Let's start with a look at healthcare and what's at stake.
Big breath.
As the cost of healthcare continues to rise and millions of citizens are left uninsured or underinsured, a large majority of Americans think our healthcare system needs fundamental changes. In addition, the cost of employer contributions to healthcare has skyrocketed, impacting global competitiveness. General Motors, for example, must add $1,500 to the cost of a car to cover healthcare for current and retired employees and dependents. Small businesses as well struggle to cover the expense. By 2014, total healthcare costs to individuals, business, and government could total $3.6 trillion. And what role should the government play? Medicare, with a rapidly rising aging population, and Medicaid face serious long-term financial challenges. And on any given day, 45 million Americans are without health insurance. Like other major American cities, Seattle has its share of uninsured and people going to great lengths to obtain insurance. Here are two who shared their stories with Jenny Cunningham of KCTS for By the People.
At Puerto Vallarta restaurant in West Seattle,
what did you talk about?
The regulars at the bar are talking about
Healthcare.
Bartender Alan Schnelly has more than a passing interest.
I just didn't know why I was so tired all the time, and it had been dragging on for a couple of years, you know.
4 years ago, doctors diagnosed Schnelly as depressed. He didn't have enough energy for his job as a maintenance engineer. Schnelly lost that job and his health insurance. Then, after a frantic trip to the emergency room, tests showed what was wrong.
And so when they told me I had, a few heart attacks that caused some scarring, it's like, whoa, I knew there was something wrong, and it's like that old joke where you see on a tombstone, I told you I was sick,
Schnelly demonstrates a growing crisis in healthcare in Washington state. It isn't just physical, it's fiscal. The personal bankruptcy rate in Washington has tripled in recent years, mostly because of medical debt. After finding out he'd had 3 heart attacks, Alan Schnelly's comfortable middle-class life disintegrated.
$300 a month is what you pay on your pills. You got your cholesterol pill, you got your high blood pressure pill.
Pill by pill.
You got gasoline, you got auto insurance, you got all these other things.
Bill by bill.
And the big one is rent. Oh, yeah, I was humiliated. Well, you gotta, number one, you gotta tell your boss, so I can't come in, I gotta go to court. Well, what do you gotta go to court for? I gotta go to court for bankruptcy. And then to tell your mom about it. She said, we'll send you to school. I said, Mom, I'm 43 years old. I don't want to go to school anymore. Why?
Schnelly's boss at the restaurant wanted to help. Lalo Morales looked into getting health insurance and nearly had a heart attack himself.
They will call me, for my 20 employees, they will call me at least $60,000 a year to provide them health insurance.
What do you think about that?
Too much money.
Starbucks will spend $156 million this year on health care for its 80,000 U.S. employees. At a time when many big corporations are cutting benefits, Seattle-based Starbucks continues to offer full health insurance, even for part-time employees.
It's so frustrating because we work so hard to get our degree. I mean, food service is fine, but I think we expected more.
These days, Molly Blancett's life has everything to do with caffeine. She makes it, sells it, drinks it too, to keep up with a 7-day-a-week work schedule.
I didn't make it hot enough yesterday. We can't let her pay.
Blancett has a degree in international studies and a full-time job in communications, but her main employer doesn't give her benefits. So another 20 hours a week, Blancett straps on a green barista apron.
I think that Howard Schultz is really really making quite the statement by saying, I don't care how many, well, if you work at least 20 hours a week, I will give you benefits.
But the fact that she has to work 2 jobs to get covered has this 23-year-old worried for her generation.
Money shouldn't be an issue when it comes to your health. And as unrealistic as that sounds, it makes me sad that your health really depends on how much money you have in this country.
While everyone grappled with the national issues of rising health care costs and insurance, each discussion also reflected local concerns. Access to health care for the rural poor was of keen interest in Charlottesville, Virginia. As part of their deliberation day, the citizens posed their questions to a panel of experts.
Is the public really aware of the health care issues of the rural poor?
I don't think the public realizes that 1 out of every 3 individuals living in rural areas have either poor or fair health. So 33% of that population is in desperate need of health care. I think it's one of those things that always goes under the radar screen.
We do have something called the National Health Service Corps, but you can't just stick a doc or a nurse out there alone. There has to be some kind of structure around them. Otherwise, they're not going to stay.
Elder and immigrant care were the issues most pressing in Miami. But because of Hurricane Wilma, Miami was unable to take part in our program. We wish them well as they recover. In Kansas City, they focused much of their discussion on embryonic stem cell research. Some say it holds the promise of curing many diseases. Others condemn it as immoral. There's a move in the Missouri legislature to ban it, while an upcoming state ballot initiative would permit it, as it would draw money and jobs to the state.
Should we vote for the ability for the STARS Institute or any institute that wants in Kansas City to do this kind of research?
If we don't do it with the controls and the level of technology we have, then it falls to somebody who perhaps doesn't require the stringent
we don't know that. That's
that
not a fair
we
statement. Genetic testing, stem cell research, cloning is happening today. And it's going to happen in Europe, it's going to happen in Asia, at the rate it's going before it ever happens here. So then what? Do we not let anybody go to Europe to get the genes fixed in their baby?
I don't think that's an appropriate stand to take. I don't think that you do something that may be wrong by default. The thing that particularly comes to mind is, a very, reprehensible group, which is, the Nazis and their research that we've used, because of what they discovered. Ethics have been leapfrogged throughout history. So we have to be very careful. It's not what we can get out of this. What we can get out of this is great. It's the how.
The technology can be used both ways, but I think there's such a potential to to cure and prevent horrible diseases that I just think we can't let it go by.
But when we get into that area of manipulating genes and creating life in a petri dish solely so we can use it to manipulate life some more, I think we run into some serious moral and religious conflict.
It's growth in knowledge, though. If God didn't want us to do stuff, I don't think God would let us know about it. I think He'd keep it a secret.
I think God gives us choices that we have to make.
Many of the events included deliberative opinion polling following the format developed by Professor Jim Fishkin. along with research and survey assistance provided by colleagues at Yale. The views of the local citizens were reflected nationally in a companion online poll of nearly 1,000 Americans conducted by the Center for Deliberative Democracy at Stanford University. Some participants were surveyed before and after 5 weeks of online study and discussion to see how their views changed as they learned more about the issues. Going into the process, many thought that the number of Americans without health insurance was the single most important problem facing the system. Let's listen in on some of the discussions.
This might reveal some of my naivete as a youth. However, I see the United States spending so much money on the military and so much money in other programs, and our health is lacking. And because why spend trillions of dollars on military when we could be spending that money on healthcare and everyone would receive excellent healthcare?
See, the reality is we're spending trillions on healthcare too.
We spend more than anybody else on healthcare.
We may not be spending as much right now as we do on military, but
3.6 trillion.
we're spending trillions on healthcare and still not getting a good healthcare.
See, that seems ridiculous to me. I don't get it.
19% of our gross domestic product is spent on healthcare.
Far more than defense.
A fifth. Yeah, it's a lot.
So we spend, twice as much as other countries of our same economic output. Why is that? Right? There really isn't a system. It's just kind of chaotic.
I think even though most of us, say we want medical care for everybody, I think everybody kind of is saying, yeah, I want medical care for everybody, but I'm not willing to give up the right for self-determination that this country was founded on. And somehow there's got to be a way developed that balances those two.
I worked 18 years as a dental assistant, dental office, no insurance. And then I've worked several years as bartenders. There's no insurance on that. Right now, I'm working part-time as a secretary at one of the local churches here in Muncie. Of course, I've never had any kind of insurance. So people work all their lives, but they don't have insurance. They can't get any help because you're just a little over some of these guidelines that the government sets. And to me, I think it's very unfair to a lot of people. The government should be looking at, especially some of us that try to work and support ourselves. But the government's guidelines are such that we're just right over the limit.
The idea of insurance and work, meaningful, gainful employment going hand in hand has an awful lot of holes in it. And there's so many people that are making $8, $9 an hour, and what they can do is meet the rent, but Lord help us if they should get sick.
Actually, that's true, because that's one of the other hidden costs by employer-sponsored health care, which is not necessarily a bad thing, obviously, and with the holes notwithstanding. The point is, on average, people's pay is less because they're getting benefits from the employer in terms of benefits that used to be called fringe, that are no longer fringe by any stretch of the imagination. And so the worker pays indirectly for that because the wages are less.
People are making economic decisions that aren't necessarily the economic decision that they would make if healthcare was not in the equation, because there might be a better job out there for them that they are more skilled at, they'd be happier at, but has fewer health insurance benefits, so they stay where they are. But on the flip side, it's the same thing for employers. A company might be the most efficient it could ever be if it has 25 employees, but they have to pay high insurance costs, so they only have 15 people, so they can't go after business, that additional work that they would like to go after, and therefore create more economic growth in the long run, just because you've got the huge cost of health insurance in the rooms.
And a lot of foreign companies that they're competing with do not have to provide insurance for their employees.
Oftentimes the reason that they don't have to provide it is because there's some kind of a nationalized system.
Yeah.
I think the worst thing in the world would be to have a government-controlled system. I don't think the government is capable of doing anything efficiently, cost-effectively. I think we can use Katrina and the aftermath here as a prime example that our government is bloated, overloaded, and unrealistic in their dealings with financial matters.
You wouldn't trust the government with your healthcare dollars?
No.
The government has our healthcare dollars now, and they're not doing a very good job.
That's right.
If government's going to pay for healthcare, it should be for those people that truly need it. Otherwise, the government should get out of it. And what I really see one of the biggest problems, local, state, and federal, is that they make so many rules and regulations driving up the cost.
There's a lot of blame on the government. Government is really not the boogeyman in this thing. It's how it's implemented. And you always get fraud in companies implementing government programs. Now just look at how many people have been indicted for fraud by implementing government programs. Now in this case, I believe it should be shared between the government, business, and the individual.
You're asking me to reach in my wallet and pay for somebody else's health care. The government mandates what insurance companies must cover. If you got to cover Viagra for 80-year-old men, you got to cover sex change operations, heart valve replacement for a convicted murderer, why aren't you taking that money, using it to take care of Ruth over here?
You don't want to reach into your wallet and pay for it. Well, some of us can't afford to reach into our wallets and pay for it. I pay for my health insurance. I just got it. I am 28 years old, and I, for the first time in my life, have health insurance, only because I have a job and I'm management. Now the people down below me, they can't get the health insurance because it's not offered in our job.
It's my understanding we're the only industrialized nation, especially of this size, that doesn't have a health care system. And this is something that's very important to most Americans. We don't have insurance. My husband's self-employed, and I just got a job. You know, I mean, we drive a decent car, we rent a nice-sized home, but still, you know, $300 or $600, which is what it cost with my last employer, $600 a month for my family. Well, $7,200 if we're kind of a decently healthy family. You know what we do? We exercise and we eat right, because that's not, you know, it's not a realistic expense for us.
The government is already playing a major role in national health care through Medicaid and Medicare. And I think they're doing a wonderful job. And so with the national health care system, or our considering one, or whatever, I believe it's worth revisiting.
I don't think anything will change until the government does something.
Yeah, I think it's going to require the government stepping in to actually make any kind of reforms. Now, whether they control it, I don't think so. I think govern, not control.
When everyone talks about the government, we are the government,
Yes,
and we are the voice that has to be heard. And I think that there's a lot being said and a lot of concern now, and I think the more that people get up in arms about it and demand some of these things from their congressmen and so forth, and find out where they stand on these issues, that's where we're going to gain.
That's our problem, is lack of involvement. If you want to have a say so, get involved.
Remember how 45% of the online sample thought the uninsured was the #1 problem? Well, that number grew to 49% after. Helping participants better understand the issues were panels of experts from each local community.
We are a nation that is very pluralistic, and we like it that way. People want to have the insurance that they prefer. What we're probably not going to find is a one-size-fits-all national health insurance approach.
In other industrial countries that have universal health programs, you know, what's included in that from a content and quality perspective, and how does it measure against the American health care?
Well, the best system on the planet is Medicare. That may surprise many people in this room, but more things are covered, better covered, more thoroughly covered. There's more equality in what you get and how you get it, and that's the best system on the planet.
My question is a basic one. Why is it that we expect everyone is entitled to free or low-cost health care?
Medical care is not a consumer product in the same sense that food, housing, it's unpredictable. For low-income people, even going to a doctor and paying $25 for a visit, and I don't know any place where you can get a visit for $25 anymore, is a major burden on a family. One of the reasons we developed health insurance was to spread the risks, which are uncertain. You get suddenly hit by a catastrophe, and it can wipe out the entire family, everything you've worked for.
That really didn't answer my question. My question is, why do we, in our in our guilt, I guess I'll say, think that we have to provide everybody with free health care. It doesn't make any sense.
It's not free health care.
You
pay for the insurance premiums, you pay a payroll tax on
fine.
Medicare.
So why should we have some kind of socialized medicine to help those people who don't help themselves?
Well, I think it really boils down to a basic philosophy. Is health care a right or a privilege? I think those countries that are ahead of us, again, the United States ranks 37th from the top in terms of overall quality of health care by the WHO. And as we globalize, have more globalized interactions, in discrepancies in health care among various countries make us a more unstable globe. So I would say, thinking about World War II and President Roosevelt's 4 freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, freedom from fear, I think we need a 5th freedom, freedom that our healthcare needs will not consume each of us with the kind of uncertainties that everyone now faces.
In all cities, there was much talk of prevention and wellness. Here's a sampling, starting with San Diego, the birthplace of managed care.
Personal responsibility is definitely first. When I was diagnosed diabetic back in 1979, I went about anywhere from 5 to 7 years on insulin. I was type 1. Only because of lack of any education, I finally was able to go to classes. Shortly after that, they took me off insulin because I didn't need it, because I knew exactly what I needed to do to change my behaviors.
Preventative care and baseline care, that's something that can address the inefficiencies and the waste.
I think that we need to triage our healthcare system, because we already have a significant population who are obese. I think you need to set aside adequate resources to deal with that population. But at the same time, I think you also need to set aside resources for a healthy population so that they stay healthy.
80% of the resources are going into the 20% of healthcare that is the least effective. And all of the things that we know that would be pretty effective are getting underfunded at every level. Prevention, early intervention, child health, prenatal health. All of those things are getting cut right and left and are underfunded. And then we put way, way, way too much money into this high-tech stuff, especially for seriously, acutely, chronically ill folk at the end of the continuum.
If healthcare should be a right, then healthy or wellness-oriented lifestyle should be everyone's personal responsibility. And I think first, what we all can do is we have to start with ourselves and our families and doing something to improve our lifestyles.
Starting at home is essential, but that's not. But we also need leadership to tell us and to advocate that too.
Our online polling, which was conducted by the research firm Polymetrics, showed that quite a few minds were changed by the deliberative process. For example, support for employer-mandated health insurance declined from 50% before deliberation to 44% after, while those backing a single-payer system rose from 51% initially to 57% when all was said and done. 6 cities focused their discussions on education. Now, Thomas Jefferson believed democracy depended on a well-educated citizenry. Success in today's global economy may also depend on it. That's what they think in New Haven, Connecticut, where a wide gap exists between the performance of white and minority students.
While Connecticut ranks among the top 5 states in math and reading achievement on the National Assessment of Education Progress, or NAEP test, a wide disparity exists between the performance of white and minority students in the state. This discrepancy is commonly referred to as the achievement gap.
What the achievement gap basically is a consistent historical pattern of white students outperforming African American students and Hispanic students on these tests across all kinds of communities, rich or poor, suburban or city.
Connecticut's minority populations are concentrated in the most poverty-stricken areas of the state, cities like Bridgeport, Hartford, New Haven, and Waterbury. In December of 2004, CONCAN, a coalition of concerned citizens and educators that are focused on closing the achievement gap in Connecticut, commissioned a random phone survey of 600 registered voters in the state to measure public opinion concerns about education.
There was a really striking divergence in attitudes based on race. African American respondents were more than twice as likely to view education as the issue that they were most concerned with. 30% of African American and Hispanic respondents felt that that issue was the most important issue in the state, compared to 15% overall.
As the achievement gap continues to be of great concern, Alex Johnston of CONCAN points out that there are schools in impoverished districts that are raising the academic achievement of minority students.
Amistad Academy here in New Haven spends several $1,000s less per pupil than the New Haven public school system around it. Its students are 97% African American and Hispanic. 84% of those students are below the poverty level. And yet the students at Amistad are achieving at a level that's on par with Greenwich, Connecticut. Close to 80% of the students are at grade level, compared to only about a third of the students in the New Haven system.
Competitiveness and the achievement gap are just two of the pressing challenges in education. American confidence in its public schools has steadily declined since the 1970s, and corporate executives claim the U.S. is not successfully educating a workforce for a globalized world.
You went back to the text and...
National discussion on how to improve public education centers around two issues: standards and testing, and the need to provide equal educational opportunities for all.
Abby?
Adding to the debate are questions as to how much control parents, local and state officials, or the federal government should have in the process. Some say government should take the lead in holding schools accountable for students' educational success. They say well-defined standards, such as those required in the No Child Left Behind legislation, are the best way for teachers and students to have clearly defined goals. But critics say standards focus too much on teaching to the test. As a result, schools may de-emphasize subjects that aren't on the test, such as art, foreign languages, writing, and music. They say that while government may offer guidelines, local communities, including parents and school officials, should decide what is best to teach and what kind of testing should be done for widely differing student bodies. There were some large shifts of opinion before and after deliberation regarding what people thought was the single most important factor for improving public schools. In the companion online sample, fewer came to believe that academic standards and teacher quality were paramount, while significantly more thought that class size and parental involvement were key. But as some cities found, involving the parents can have its own local challenges. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, with its large immigrant population, mainly Hispanic, the issue is one of language.
People think that because you don't speak English, you're an ignorant. There's so many misunderstandings about the students, especially students that came from Mexico. When they come to the system, they really don't understand what's going on. And there's nobody to tell them, so you lose that kid. They need to learn English. And they need to do it right away, you know? But sometimes they didn't get the help. And then teachers sometimes doesn't have time to do it. So these kids are pushed away from the schools. They've been ignored. So they get tired and drop out.
A mí me gustaría asistir más seguido a las reuniones de la escuela. El problema es que cuando voy no hay alguien que me traduzca al español. La verdad es que sí estamos interesados en ir, pero el problema es que no entendemos lo que están hablando.
One of my ideas for the children to learn is preach with example. You know, that's why we have classes for parents and we do workshops and we do a lot of things with the parents. So they're with the example, they're teaching their children, you know, what they can do.
The most significant movement in our online poll concerned the funding of public education. For example, there was increased support after deliberation for raising taxes to boost teacher pay. Let's listen in on some of our participants.
What we need to do is get the parents more involved. A lot of times parents don't get involved until their kid bring home a report card that has straight Fs or so many tardies, and or they being suspended, and then they're going, well, how did this happen? It's because they're not involved.
How would you recommend getting them involved?
Open houses, school conferences, communication with teachers, and now there are so many more avenues with computers, with just a host of ways to be in communication with the teachers. And of course, as children progress through the school system, the complexities come into it with multiple teachers, multiple needs, and multiple ways to communicate, just to make sure your child is on track, and so that the parent is not the last to know about problems developing.
We're the choir sitting here having a Pollyanna discussion about parent involvement. What are you going to do in a district if the parents don't show up?
If you're not engaging the parents, or the parents can't get engaged because of work or whatever, other reasons that they can't get engaged, then you know what? They can assist the help of grandparents, uncles, whomever, church members, the community at large.
If we don't help these children now, if they don't make it in school now, it's going to cost a whole lot more later. And so this idea that we shouldn't pour resources into this effort, I reject that. We must pour resources into this effort. And children who have special needs, whether they're behavioral, physical, whatever, we need to address that. And that may take a little more money.
How many people around this table think we have the best possible way of paying for our public schools in the state of Nebraska right now?
I think it's flawed because it is too dependent upon the property tax, and property is very unevenly distributed, so that property is not matched up with students, it's not matched up with school districts, that sort of thing, and we simply have to explore an alternative to property tax funding.
What I would like to see would be a restructuring and just a bare bones approach to what is an essential program. Is Head Start really essential? Are school lunch programs really essential? Are all the electives we're offering really essential? Discrete math, or just teach the kids normal math? I would say cut out the things that are not essential.
Well, I don't want to see any of the programs being cut. I would want all those extra programs in school. We had advanced math, we had advanced English, and I know some students didn't want to take that, but I'm glad that it was offered because it did kind of give you a boost up on some of the other, like getting into college and that stuff.
I believe the education expenses should be #1 on our budgets at the state level as it is at the local level. I'm a proponent of increase in sales tax. Another source would be pari-mutuel or Keno funds, like in Hastings or Kearney. I think Grand Island has them too.
If we talk about having this high level of excellence, then there really is no alternative. You have to pay for it, plain and simple. Whether it's local tax, state tax, more federal assistance, if they're going to issue more mandates, those types of things have to happen if you want to have excellence in schools. If we would make a decision that we want to have a bare bones program, then fund it that way.
You know, the communities need that education to keep themselves viable, but we also need to do it to keep our country in a top-notch global positioning. So, you know, I'm probably one of the few people that's willing to pay more money and to keep the education standards at the highest level possible, even though I hate my tax statement every time that I get it.
I want to see improved standards for the increase. I guess that would be my biggest thing. If it's going to go up, I want to see the results.
As these Nebraskans deliberated, members of the state legislature's Committee on Education listened with interest. Later, the state senators were invited to join the discussion and answer questions from the citizens.
The concern I have is there's a certain degree of them, certain percentage of them, a low percent, 25% maybe, that are college bound. They're the college prep tracks. But then what concerns me is the other 75%, and what we've done through education is one of our goals is preparing these young people to go out into society, not be a burden on that, to be an asset and add to it. And so on the vocational track, what do we have to offer them?
I do feel that, and I believe it is part of the essential education, that we start doing some career education very early in the elementary schools and continue that. I do feel that we probably are not doing enough in our
secondary schools in the way of technical education.
My own view is that in this day and age, what we need is a rigorous academic program in high schools for all students, not excuse any student from a rigorous academic curriculum. And as Lane pointed out, and that's exactly right, trying to teach auto mechanics or some of those kinds of things, it's just, you can't afford it. The cost per students are just astronomical. So high schools need to have a rigorous academic program, in my view.
I'm the HAL coordinator of schools with high ability learners, the gifted area. And for those students, I see the rigorous curriculum being a great idea and the opportunities. On the other hand, I'm saying I don't know if the citizens of our state are willing to put up with the failures. I mean, to go to a rigorous curriculum, you will have failure on a much larger level than we've seen before. I mean, as a teacher, I have no problem with establishing standards that I'm supposed to teach to, but then people have to understand there's going to be ramifications. And those ramifications are going to be things that may not be really pleasing to everybody. And a lot of times as a classroom teacher, it gets really frustrating when the whole emphasis seems to be on a particular score, a particular result of a particular type of curriculum, when that isn't necessarily education in my particular point of view.
I have to disagree, because I don't think it's about marking time. I don't think it's about raising children to feel good about themselves, even though, you know, put head to head against a kid coming in from a different country who's going to get that job, I think they're going to feel worse on that end of the scale when they find out, oops, I didn't measure up and someone else was better. So I think we do need to start the more rigorous standards younger.
We will have a number of people who will not meet those standards. And so do we just say, try harder? Because you haven't met the standards, I'm sorry, try harder next time. And yes, that is something that will goad a number of people into performing at a higher level. But it's public education. It is not education for a few. We talk about the vocational track and those things. You know, we have a number of students that is their goal in life. And so many times we see that those things as not achieving and not being successful. And that's really frustrating, again, as you can probably tell from my voice.
Sarah, would you have been a better student, and would more students at Hastings have succeeded if there had been a lot tougher standards for you guys?
For some, it would have benefited. For some, I don't think it would have. I think it would have pushed them more to dropping out, more to, there's going to be those kids that they can't do it, they can't make it. What do we do with them then if we go to the rigorous?
Well, I'm not convinced that that there's not a way that you push each student to the level they can achieve. You at least put the rigor out there so that everybody's exposed to it. You know, what I'm afraid of, on the contrary, is that, oh gosh, if we push people this hard, there'll be somebody that fails. So we're going to let everybody pay the price because somebody will fail and feel bad. I don't think you can do that. Not in this day and age. I mean, you've mentioned, you know, people from other countries and so on, and how hard they're pushing, and I think that's a reality.
So, what did our companion online polling say about standardized testing? Before deliberation, 58% said there was too much emphasis on it. Afterwards, that number grew to 65%, and the approval rating for the federal government's No Child Left Behind Act, which wasn't very strong going in, only 39%, dropped even further to 31% after deliberations. So how did folks feel about their deliberations?
I think the sharing and the bringing of people together to hear each other's views was probably something that has a ripple effect in a community.
It's exciting to hear other people's opinions, people that you don't ordinarily interface with.
A lot of the answers that I needed, I received today. I have a lot more hope in our system than I did before, and I'm leaving today feeling educated.
I think that one nice thing is that we learn that we all do have a role to play, and that we can have something to say about issues like this and participate.
It's always encouraging to find that you can take a disparate group of people, as we had in our group. There were 8 of us, coming from different disciplines, different life experiences, And when we talk about the same problems, we each bring our own perspective that makes the contributions better than the sum of the parts.
Healthcare issues are a broad agenda, and so it's not just one specific one, it's a lot that matters and that people need to get involved because there are issues that matter to us and to our neighbors or to our children or to our grandparents, and if we're not involved, then nobody's healthcare issues are going to be considered.
I don't have any school-age children, but now I'm more inspired to get more involved in trying to help the children that are basically left behind.
I really want to see what's going to happen with all the input we're giving them.
In order to be, I think more people should do exactly what we did today, get together as a group, discuss the issue, and present it to our representatives.
Legislation should not be top down. We need to engage the public and ask their views, what they think, and how together we can create a partnership at the local, state, and federal level that provides the opportunity for the best public policy.
And hopefully this can continue and perhaps evolve into something more interactive where we as community members could be making more difference in the decision-making process.
Joining us to discuss what's been said and how we as a country decide our priorities are Timothy Knowles, Executive Director of the Center for Urban School Improvement at the University of Chicago, which has just received a $5 million MacArthur grant. Knowles is a former Deputy Superintendent of the Boston Public Schools. Dr. Benjamin S. Carson, Sr. is the Director of Pediatric Neurosurgery at the Johns Hopkins Children's Center. He's widely known for his work separating conjoined twins. He's the founder of the Carson Scholars Fund, which encourages academic excellence in young Americans of all backgrounds and provides scholarships toward college costs. Jennifer Marshall is Director of Domestic Policy Studies at the Heritage Foundation, where she oversees research on education, welfare, and religion and civil society. And Ruth Faden is the Executive Director of the Bioethics Institute at Johns Hopkins University and Senior Research Scholar at Georgetown University's Institute of Ethics. She's the co-author of the forthcoming Social Justice, the Moral Foundations of Public Health and Health Policy. Well, guests, we just saw just folks trying to make sense of two of the most challenging issues in our society today. Ruth Faden, what were your impressions?
I think I was struck primarily by two things. One, I was struck by how hard people are hurt, how hard they're set back when they're not able to provide health care or get access to health care for themselves or for their families. And there were some voices there that really were quite gripping. We know this, but when we hear somebody speak about their personal difficulties, it is always very overwhelming. I was also very struck by the fact that there was such consensus about the importance of access to health care. That's not the same as saying that we had agreement in the people participating in this activity, this remarkable activity, in how we're supposed to ensure that everybody has access to health care, or exactly how much health care we're all supposed to have access to. But what we heard in this program was clearly a very high degree of agreement about the importance of health care to the American people.
Timothy Knowles?
I think what we heard about health, we also heard about education, that there's an incredibly deep value in our society focused on the importance of public education. And I think there's some disagreement embedded in the citizenry about what the underlying purpose of our public schools really are. On one hand, you heard a lot about student achievement and about keeping competitive in a global economy. On another level, you heard people talking about other reasons that public schools exist, leveling the playing field for kids who are furthest behind. I think the reality is starkly different, and I'm not convinced that they do serve that purpose for the poorest Americans. And there's also a point that reoccurred that our public schools help sustain our democracy, and they are the manifestations of our democracy in the sense that student council representatives are elected, PTA members are elected, school board members are elected. They are an important part to what America is and represents.
Ben Carson?
Well, I think there's general agreement that
healthcare is in shambles. I certainly heard that. And I didn't hear very many solutions in terms of how we're going to fix it. You know, as far as the education is concerned, obviously it's one of the backbones of America that has made us strong, and yet I have a sense in listening to so many people that that backbone is weakening. Last year, we only produced 60,000 engineers compared to 392,000 from China. We started to see how we might be starting to fall behind. I think people are starting to recognize that, and I think there's a general will to do something about it.
Jennifer, what did you make of what you saw?
I heard some disenfranchisement coming from these parents. I think too many of them have been consigned to an idea of parental involvement that is only about bake sales and bulletin boards, and not really a clear ability to make choices about their children's education. And there are going to have to be some changes in policy terms to the governance system and the funding structures in education if we want to see parents able to make those kind of directional decisions. And I'll tell you, I see parents who want to do that. In Washington, D.C., here, our nation's capital, when a scholarship organization offered 1,700 scholarships as a part of the D.C. voucher experiment that Congress authorized a couple of years ago, twice as many parents signed up for that as the number of slots. That tells me that those parents know what a good education is, and they know where to get it, and they want the power to be able to do that, and the empowerment through economic means to be able to do that.
So does that mean really restructuring what's there on the ground today?
I think we're seeing that the system right now is organized in such a way that it doesn't give parents and other taxpayers the traction they need. And the fact that we view it as an education system is a problem. This is a very individual enterprise about an individual child's life, and yet we think of it in what I called an assembly line fashion, that we have one education system in America that's supposed to meet everyone's needs. I think that's an outdated mode of thinking of education.
So the talk about competition, that's sometimes presented as a cure-all, but does it belong in the system as well?
I think it's important but not sufficient. Good schools, if there's one thing that's true in the educational research, it's that teachers and principals matter the most. And so we have to think about how we're developing our people and supporting them when they get there, so teachers don't teach in isolation for 35 years. That's number one in my view. Number two is that we've got to measure what matters most. And that, so not just the blunt instruments that are used at the end of every year we call standardized tests, but really if we believe high schools should be delivering college-age kids, college-ready kids and kids who succeed when they get there, we should be measuring that. How many kids from each high school go to college and what happens when they do? Those are the kinds of data that I think could help actually inform our schools and focus us on the right ends.
Ruth Faden, Thomas Jefferson said if we're going to have a successful democratic society, we have to have a well-educated and healthy citizenry. It's interesting that more than 200 years ago, he saw a synthesis between these two issues too. Was he right?
He was absolutely right. The relationship between health and education is so intimate, and the two together so essential to civil society and to a thriving democracy. It really cannot be overstated. You can't send poorly nourished children who've had assaults to their development, either before they were born or in early childhood, to a school and expect the school to fix it. You can't expect schools to make up for poor health, and you can't expect people of poor health to learn. And the two together, so closely connected. We heard in the program one of the first things that happens when people really get into difficulty with regard to access to health care is they lose their jobs, or they may lose their jobs. Then they need education, they need training. If they're not well educated, where do they go? We had a person speak about the fact that he knew how to manage his type 1 diabetes only after he had some capacity to understand what it meant to have type 1 diabetes and how his own behavior would affect his health. The two are incredibly intimately related, and I submit that both your health and having an adequate understanding of the world around you that only education and learning can provide are essential to a decent life, absolutely essential.
Dr. Carson, if we assume that our present-day healthcare system was created by a sort of a distilled set of things that we value and choices that we've made, What does it tell us about America in 2005 that this is what we've got?
Well, it's an interesting question, because what we have right now in 2005 is a relatively dysfunctional system. It doesn't work for a lot of people. It works for people who have a lot of money and a lot of connections and resources. But, you know, we have to ask ourselves, where is the money going? You know, 39 cents on a healthcare dollar goes to pay administrative costs. There's always a push to fill up the hospitals and keep the operating rooms full. You know, we really need a new paradigm. We need to start thinking about wellness rather than sickness, because we will bankrupt ourselves if we continue to think about sickness and not start thinking about preventive health care. It's the biggest problem that we have right now in our society.
Let me very quickly go around the table, because we've seen people who aren't necessarily policy experts, but experts about their own lives, experts about the places they live. How do you tap that? How do you give them the feeling that what they think and what they say does find its way into the eventual decision making? Ben Carson?
Well, as far as the schools are concerned, if in fact we were willing to maybe think out of the box a little bit and take advantage of some of those people who are in the environment, I think we'd be much further ahead. For instance, we have an enormous wealth in this nation of people who are retiring, who are experts in chemistry, physics, mathematics, people who invented catalytic converters, who would be delighted, I mean absolutely thrilled, to come into a high school and teach kids. Can you imagine the wealth that we would have in our schools? And we continue to complain about not having the science and the math in our middle schools and in our high schools, and yet we have an abundance of people out there who could do this, and we just need to find a way to get them into those places and let them work.
Jennifer Marshall, how do you see us connecting these citizens into the process?
Well, I think we're going to have to see policy changes that put the consumer in the driver's seat, and that's the same for healthcare policy as well. It's giving the consumer of education, which is really the parent and the child, the opportunity to make substantive decisions about where that child attends school and about the kind of mode that they'll receive education through. I think in that kind of a system, we'll see the kind of innovation that is really so promising and capture all these things, the kind of teaching that Dr. Carson was talking about, the kind of strategic teaching styles that are closing the achievement gap. It's going to come about when we allow consumers to be in the driver's seat.
Ruth Faden?
Well, I'll focus on health, just to be different. But focusing on health for a moment, it's not possible for people to become involved in structuring how they get access to health care or what health care decisions need to be made if they're completely outside of any meaningful way to have regular medical care. So we have to start with the biggest structural problem that we're facing, and which is the fact that we don't have a just way of organizing and financing access to medical care in this country. I'm not now suggesting or specifying any particular solution, but it's got to be recognized. The system doesn't work. We don't have a just way to finance health care for everybody. We have more people without access to medical care than it is imaginable for people outside of the United States to even fathom that this country has that level of disfranchisement. It is unparalleled in terms of a notion of social and national security that we're in this situation. And it's not simply, and I'll emphasize this, it's not simply a matter of personal security. It is a matter of national security and national survival. We can't sustain major disasters in public health. We can't sustain a major bioterrorist attacks or threats if we don't have a coordinated system for financing health care which is fair to all of us. So I would focus on that.
And Timothy Knowles, how do we harness the interest, that concern that we sought?
Around the people that schools are for. Around children, some children may need tutors because their parents are working too many jobs. Some children may need a mentor. Some classrooms may need the physicist to come in. But I think if we don't direct that appetite to be engaged locally at the school site level around the thing that schools are supposed to be improving, the education competitiveness of our country, then we're heading off in the wrong direction.
Well, thank you. And guests, thank you all for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Many of our participating PBS stations and their partners will be holding additional By the People events in the coming months. If you'd like more information or to comment on what you heard today, log on to pbs.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ray Suarez. Goodbye.
You can hear more of Nebraska's By the People discussion on public education. Join us on December 1st at 7 Central Time when NET Television News presents a special one-hour program, Your Schools. It's part of our Nebraska Connects series.
This program was made possible by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, with additional support from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
We are PBS.